So I'm going to start the recording. All right, so I am going to share my PowerPoint and I'm going to see if I can make sure I'm doing the correct sharing thing. So today our topic is vocabulary. Okay, so we're going to, and I'll just do reading view here so it's a little bit better. All right, so we're going to talk about vocabulary and we might think, oh, that's pretty a narrow topic. But really vocabulary is the key to a lot of the things that we're going to do in our reading and even in our writing. We might have to choose certain types of words to understand, but more than that, write on. And if you understand the vocabulary pieces, usually that means you have a pretty good understanding of what the topic is. Okay, so so learning new words. So how do we, the base parts of this is how do we do this, right? What's the basic things that we need to do? So I'm going to go over some of these things. This is particularly relevant for those once you get into probably even in your first year of university, you'll take psychology, sociology, different kinds of topics. And you all of a sudden find, oh my gosh, there's all these words that they use. I'm in, education, so I know that we speak in code that only the educators know, let's say. So a lot of these particular topics have, or these particular content area, I guess, have particular types of words. So we're going to go over, just relating it to known words, seeing the parts in words, making these kinds of vocabulary webs. So, kind of in general, how do you make like words come alive in a visual format? And then, talking about visuals, picture cues, and then I'm not sure if everyone is aware, but there is a really great program called Quizlet. And so we're going to kind of go over, all of those different kinds of things today. So now this looks like a horrible word, and here's another word maybe for us to remember, but morphological awareness is basically just understanding that parts of words have meaning. Like think of the letter S, for example. If I put the letter S at the end of the word cat, it changes the meaning from cat to two or more, right? One cat to two cats, right? So in that sense, those even small little letters can create those types of meaning parts, right? So it can be one letter, it can be a group of letters that stand for meaning. So that's kind of what that morphological awareness is, that we're really talking about. If we can break out those words, where is the meaning in that? And that makes the words a lot easier to understand, because in that way, if I understand that AUD means to hear, I can understand what audiologist means. I can understand what audio means, auditory. I know what that means. Even auditorium, right? Means you're in a place that you're going to listen, right? Or hear something. So morphological awareness is really important, because it doesn't, you could relate that meaning part to something that like audio, and then relate it to maybe audiologist that maybe you didn't think of connecting before, right? If you understand AUD. And again, that whole idea of that morphological awareness, if we understand those parts, then it can help us with our reading or spelling, obviously with our with our writing, right? When we're doing maybe more like content, let's say class specific writing. So, just if we're looking at, if you look at the word just generally, there's obviously a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, not all words have that, but if we're talking about like the words that we're talking about, which is more complex vocabulary, we're going to look at that part of it, so that we're looking at these longer, essentially they're longer words, and then breaking them apart. Okay. And like I said, all of these parts have meaning, but if you understand those parts, it's going to help you learn them and also help you to remember them. So, if we're thinking about vocabulary, again, if you look at certain kinds of prefixes, basically they actually typically hold a little bit more meaning and interest than the ending. So the prefixes are at the beginning, right? So an example of that is like, right? And in this case, I'm changing it to dislike. Completely different meaning, right? But if I say like and likes, just the ending, it doesn't hold that much meaning, right? But basically like and dislike are the opposite, right? So the beginning parts of words, these what we call prefixes, are probably more interesting in that sense, but I would probably argue even the root, like that middle part of the word, holds a lot of the meaning, maybe more meaning than anything, of course, right? So again, if you're looking at morphology, let's say just the meaning parts of words, there, if you know these kinds of prefixes and those kinds of suffixes, that's like 75 to 85% of words that have, the beginning parts and the ending parts. So if you know just these parts of words, then you know a lot of vocabulary, right? In terms of meaning, right? Because you know the meanings of these, and then you can apply it to all kinds of new words. However, though, when you're at this level of study, like higher education and university, you're going to need more than that. You're going to need things that we don't really find every day, but you're going to have to remember it. Okay. So that's kind of where I'm going here. So, this is just a really big chart on, how many words you can find with these particular kinds of prefixes. So it's kind of interesting, right? So there's 782 words, right? I mean, that's an easy one for us. It doesn't really matter, but it's just, again, kind of reminding us that the more prefixes that we know, it kind of can be related to different words that we might have to remember in more complex language, right? Like, so for trans, TRANS, we might have various words that we can think of, transport, transgender, transatlantic, right? So all of those, are meaning across or changing or through, right? So interesting, right? So if you can understand what those meaning parts and words are, it kind of helps you understand maybe new words, right? And that's just another example of that. So again, more prefixes, but these tend to be, again, what I said was they hold a lot of the meaning. So just by changing those parts, then you can understand how that vocabulary can be tweaked a little bit, right? So, and it doesn't have to be basic words, it can be things that are a little bit more specific, like, well, I guess pre-expose, right? Prejudge. We know what pretest is, so we understand what prejudge means, right? So if we understand it happens before, right? So you can relate it to different, like, again, these might not be specifically words that you might need to remember in terms of your specific content area. But when you go into certain things like this, like anti, counter, hyper, right? What is hyperactive related to hyperinflation, right? This might be, let's think of another one here. Kilobyte. How is that related to kilometer, right? Maybe kilobyte is a little bit harder to remember. But if we understand that the kilo is that 1,000 unit, or, you think of mal, right? Means bad, malfunction. What does that mean in terms of, bad, maltreatment, malnutrition, right? So if we understand those parts, all of these kind of newish, maybe if we assume that these are new words, can be much easier to remember and much easier almost to use. And once you start using this vocabulary, now you want to be careful who you use that word, those advanced words with, right? You might not want to do that, when you're out and about getting your groceries. But you can certainly start using that a lot easier if you can really pull those parts out and then throw them into new words, because you just already have an immediate reference, right? So like counter argument, counter example, counter approval or proposal, sorry. How does that go with against? How does counter example go with the meaning of against, right? How does it relate to counter argument, right? Counter proposal. So again, some of these might be new, or maybe none of them are new to you, but it's just giving you the idea that if you know that prefix, you can start relating it to words that like inattention, we know, and it means the converse of or opposite, let's say. What does incoherence mean? What does incompatibility mean, right? We know when we're compatible with somebody, but what's incompatible, okay? All right, and then again, we're getting into more detail, like way down the rabbit hole of content vocabulary or specific area of study vocabulary. So you can see here, there's all kinds of different ones that are a little bit more challenging, right? So poly, right? What does poly mean? It means many. So if we think polysyllable, that's the parts of words, let's say. So this is many syllables, right? And so we don't have a word there that we have to memorize, right? We can think of it as that means many, and then we know that that's the like word parts, let's say. Tele is distant. So what is tele or telecommunications, right? So distant communication, right? We might not have ever thought about tele, right? Or tele, I guess in this case, telecommunications. But think about it in terms of television. What does television mean? If we know that distant, tele means distant, right? So it means sort of like we're getting something that we're seeing from far away. That's the whole concept of television, right? So it's interesting. Then it also adds a little bit of depth to what we know television means, right? It's just a word that we know, but we can relate it to telecommunication, right? If that's a word that we're trying to figure out. Ultra, right? Ultrasound. So we know that it's beyond, right? It's beyond sort of like that thing right there, but it's kind of like ultrasound, if you think about it, what the meaning of it's related to that concept of beyond, right? Underpayment, exact, et cetera, right? So if you start looking at those words parts again, it really does help kind of immediately, especially if you can find something that's very related to you, like tele, right? So telecommunication, television, right? Okay, so if we go down the rabbit hole of science for a little bit, so I pulled out some, prefixes. I'm certainly not going to go into all the vocabulary in science here, but again, I'm just pointing out the fact that, if you look at these, and again, these are not common. These are not, in the grocery store shopping for something kind of words, right? But these are definitely words that you're going to find in your biology. I mean, also obviously social studies will have its own type of word parts, right? So let's take a look at endo, meaning within, right? What does epi mean? It means upon or over, or I guess up, right? Think of epicenter, right? Hemisphere, meaning half, right? And so you can go on and on with that and go through your science words that say specifically here and see how they're related in words that you might understand and words that you might not know, but you will have an easier time with it if you've gone through some of those parts of the words, okay? All right, yeah, so yeah, there's like sub, that's an easier one, I guess. We always talked about trans, hyper, hypo. This is interesting, right? Because hyper means too much, but hypo means not enough or under, right? So you can be hypoactive, but you can also be hyperactive. And if you start relating that to, again, those science words, it clicks because you're like, oh, okay, that means not enough hypo, right? Hypothermic, I guess. I'm not sure. I think that's a word. So that means not enough heat, right? Okay, so and then again, suffixes, I feel they're not so interesting. I mean, they're only there really to kind of change the use of the word. So don't get too like hung up on them. But like ism, like that's sort of a study or a belief, right? Communism, it's a belief. Narcissism, it's self-belief, right? So you can be narcissistic, right? So I don't think I have that suffix here, but you can have narcissism. So I'm not changing the concept of narcissism or narcissistic, right? But you can be a narcissist, right? But so the concept of the word there is still meaning the same, but it's just how I'm using it. IST means a person to who, right? Chemist, narcissist, plagiarist, right? So again, these don't really hold a ton of meaning except for where you're going to put it in your sentence or how you're going to use it, right? The meaning really is in that base word, right? So refuse, refusing, refusal. I'm just changing, I'm refusing something, I'm doing it, compared to the refusal. I'm just changing it to a noun, let's say, or a thing, right? So really, it's not a big deal, right? But if you are doing, things that are, I think, using those, like, let's say philosophers, maybe in philosophy class, or maybe in psychology, there's certain terms that have ism there, right? So thought processes or whatever. Then that makes a little bit more sense instead of just thinking, oh my gosh, what's that word? It's ism. I don't know what ism means. So you have that kind of anchor for yourself that, that's just an ending that means, a belief, let's say. Okay. So again, a little bit more of the same here. So, again, I'm just trying to encourage you to look at these parts and go, yeah, I got that. That just means, in this case, able to, right? A lot of times the way I would probably talk to students is some of these endings are not that interesting in the sense, but they're just related to, right? So enlightened to me is just being related to being enlightened, right? It's just, related to it. Awaken, it's related to being awoke, let's say, right? So again, not really a lot of meaning, but pertaining to, so AL, regional as compared to region, right? It's just a different way of using it, okay? All right, and then just more of the same suffixes again. So if you're looking at these quickly, you can see again, it's not really, it's prefer or preference. So again, I prefer to, etc., something. But my preference is, again, it's just the word prefer there, but it's just adding a little bit more of an ending there to kind of narrow down how I'm using that whole concept of prefer something, right? My preference, or I prefer, right? So, try not to get too, caught up in the endings of the words, get caught up in what I guess this could suggest is look at the base, right? Look at the base of the words, like advertise, instead of thinking of that whole long string of words. Although these are, I know, fairly easy, obviously. But again, it's just kind of, going to the idea that we want to look at the meaning part of the word rather than these little endings, right? So again, astronomer, geographer, right? So that's just meaning a person who, but then if you have something that's like, well, I don't know, baggage, bag, right? It's just an added ending, right? So looking at the main idea there. So again, if you're looking specifically about science things, right? So science terminology, let's say, you can look at different kinds of endings here, and they actually have real meaning, right? So synthesis maybe is surgical puncture, right? Osis is an infection. Well, I always usually say ology is various branches of science, right? So that's really helpful. Penia, I think is how you say that. Deficiency, right? Apathy, if you think of pathy, it's a condition. That's really, really helpful if you're trying to remember those kinds of advanced vocabulary, specific, let's say, in science, right? And here's these kinds of roots. This is what I'm suggesting is really important for us to look at. I'm not going to obviously go through all of these, but the one that I was speaking to earlier here was AUD, meaning to hear, right? So if I knew AUD means to hear, I understand what audience is. But if let's say I'm reaching out and a word that I don't know, and I'm reading audible, right? Of course, I'm sure we know that word. But if let's pretend we didn't, I would know that that root means to hear. It's related to audience. So audible is something I can totally understand now. It's able to, remember IBLE means able to hear. It's audible, right? So you can see how some of that, even bene, right? So benefactor, benevolent. If you don't know what benevolent means, then relate it to bene, which is benefactor, or beneficial, right? Maybe beneficial is a word that we know, and we get that bene means good. So therefore, benevolent and benefactor are relating to something good, right? Okay. So some of that is just spending even 5 seconds looking at these words and trying to think how they're related, right? And especially, I think the best one is if you can relate it to something you know. Like in this case, I know what an audience is, but what is audible? I know what beneficial is, but I might not really know what benevolent is, right? But if I know that BENE, now this is a horrible slide in terms of reading it, but it's just kind of suggesting that there's tons of roots out there. So don't be scared of looking at them, right? So graph meaning drawn, but look at the words that you can relate to that. Photograph, graphic, or drawn or written, I guess. Photograph, graphic, polygraph, telegram, hexagram. Okay, all of those are related to that. Mania, madness or insanity. So pyromania, kleptomania, bibliomania, megalomania, maniac. So again, really good bang for your buck. If you know these Latin roots, and that's where I would probably head if I was trying to remember and make these vocabulary words stick. I would definitely work on the roots, because really the beginning and especially the end, in my opinion, don't add too much. Of course, I feel like the beginning parts do, but so again, if we look at these, another kind of list of different kinds of roots, phys, right? So it related to nature, body, or natural science. Physics, physiology, metaphysics, physical, geophysics. So if I know what PHYS means, and I know it's related to like the natural sciences, boom, I got it. I mean, it makes sense now. It's not just physics. I got to remember what that word is, right? Therm, right? I said hypothermia, let's say, therm meaning related to heat, right? Thermal. Well, we know what thermometer is. So why can't we know what thermonuclear is, right? Why would that not be interrelated? It has something to do with heat, right? And I mentioned already actually hypothermia, right? So again, looking at these, and a lot of these are getting more, a little bit more complex, right? In luminary, what is that related to? Let's say luminous or illuminate. We would know what illuminate means, but why not relate that to a new word that you might need to know, which might be luminary, let's say, right? So anytime you can, you're going to relate it. And then, of course, take out the meaning, the root part of it. Like technically, most of the time, it's the middle part of the word. You can really get into this, and this could be a way that you could study your vocabulary. Now, you might be going, oh my gosh, what does this say? But look, MULT means many. Okay, you might not have to do all these other extra pieces. That might be a little bit too much. But if you start with this MULT, many, so all of these words you can make in that, right? And again, this might not be a vocabulary word that you need to do, but just think of this as an example. So multiples, multiplication. You might not get into this as specifically as they do in terms of where they're looking for the endings and things like that. But the whole idea is you have one picture of a bunch of words using MULT as its root. So that to me is complete efficient in terms of if I have, multiple words that are just not sticking there, make what we call a word matrix, right? So that you're looking at that root and then adding all the endings that might go along with that, but you got instant vocabulary there, right? Now, in this case, they're relating it to different things like complex, that whole idea of related pieces like MULT, they're suggesting is related here, right? In terms of the PLE and the PLIC, you don't need to go down that rabbit hole. Well, you might, but I would suggest probably just starting with a basic word matrix rather than, what we typically do is write the complex, horrible word and then write the definition, then write the word and then write the definition. But instead, make a matrix and have your words and then relate them to vocabulary that you already know, and then put the definition of those roots, right? There, so it's easier for you to remember. So again, this might not be something that you really need to remember in terms of vocabulary in your level of study, but it just gives you another example of what that might look like, right? Divide means separate, devise also means separate, right? And so they're just adding on prefixes or the beginning parts and then the endings, okay? Right, okay, so this is just another example of that. So in this case, we're looking at FRI, and in this case, this is going way down, right? So this might not be intuitive for us to even get that connection, but FRI actually means love, right? So in this case, it's quite fascinating. That is more going into the history of the word. So if you really do get into this, it can just be less about, making these word matrices, but perhaps more about, looking at the history of the word and where it's related, right? So you can get that deep in it. If there's words that are just like, I have no idea, you might be able to find that history of the word. And that can be as easily done as going into dictionary.com and just go, looking at the word and finding what dictionary.com says. My favorite, I guess, is etymology online, which is literally the history of our language. Again, so word analysis. So let's look at arthritis, right? So arth means joints. Itis means inflammation. Boom, we know it, right? And we could relate that to other words, well, wait, you're putting me in the spot here now. I don't know if I can find another word off the top of my head, but rheumatitis, is that a word, I think? So then that would be, the inflammation of the rheumatitis, right? Bacteriostasis, right? So bacteria obviously means, the bacteria part, and stasis is slowing or stoppage of motion or activity, right? So like, wow, that's a word, right? Dactyl, digit, and gram is written. So it's another name for you guessed it, maybe you didn't, but fingerprint, right? So again, those are really horrible words. Like, what in the world does that mean? But if you break it apart and know what each parts of those words mean, it's not a word that you have to remember. Dactylogram, oh my gosh, what is that? Dactyl means finger, right? And gram means written. And you could think of even like if you relate to the word program. Well, what's a program? It's something that's written down for us to know what's going to happen, right? So gram, I can relate to in my words, the word program, right? Okay, and then there's more, right? You can do this with a whole bunch of things, right? Thermoacidophiles, okay? So, phile means love, or phil, I guess, means love. Acid obviously is acidic, and therma mean here in this case heat. So it's something that live in extremely hot and acidic environments, right? So who knew, right? But again, you don't have to be a victim of that. You could create, a word matrix of therm, right? In terms of THERM, and relate that to thermometer or hypothermia, let's say, right? And then likewise with the PHIL, if you need to, right? Okay. So again, another way, let's say if you want to kind of play around a little bit more with particular words, and you can see in this case, oh my gosh, what is that word? You write the word, you might, break it up to how it's pronounced. And then you're going to have those meaning parts, like I'm recommending, obviously the definition. Pictures are worth 1,000 words. Come on, right? We have to draw these words that are horrible for us to remember. To me, now I can, maybe not, but I can kind of explain what this means, right? Just by looking at that picture, I kind of get an idea maybe of what's happening here, right? That's really important. I think a lot of textbooks do that a little bit, but certainly if you make your own interpretation of it in your own way, right, it'll make a lot more sense. So yeah, and I'm not going to do the matrices together. And this is, that etymology thing that I just mentioned, right? So it's the history of the word. It is a website literally only about the history of words. Okay. So there's a lot of people that are interested in this, and this is what they do for study. So certainly use that to your advantage. Okay. And then there's other websites. You can look at Memodex. So it's a free online dictionary. It has, different kinds of things in terms of definitions that might have an audio link there. And then obviously the etymology, so the history of the words. And it has, some pictures on it. But, really just, dictionary.com is great, right? Just looking at those words and just seeing if you can find words that are related, things like that. And then vocabulary.com, that one is pretty good. It has, you can find specific subject area, but not specific coursework. So it's a little bit broader, right? But if you're really trying to remember vocabulary, the best way to remember it is by using it, right? It's not really about memorizing it for the exam and then that's it, right? So if we use the vocabulary and use it in different ways, this might be a way to kind of target that, right? And anytime you do that, it's not off topic. It's not studying, right? It's actually just enhancing your thinking about it. So when you end up in an exam scenario, you're like, I got this. I've been using these words in all kinds of different ways, right? And so the vocabulary becomes less about memorizing and more about just sticking in your head and having all these connections with the new words, right? This one I like. This is called a visual thesaurus. And of course, a thesaurus is really just showing us different words that are related. So in this case, I guess I cut and paste a screenshot of the social sciences. So I just typed it in, and this visual thesaurus then gives you all these different words that might be related to the term that you've typed in. It's not free though. You do have to pay for it. I think that was one of the free ones that I got. So I just cut and paste it. But certainly it's kind of interesting again, right? Because then you can see all the words that are interrelated to that social science concept, or you can put, anything in there, right? So it's interesting. And then again, you can do so simple. If you don't like my word matrix, fine. You can do what we call more like a concept map, right? So, put the word that you're trying to remember in the middle, and you could maybe write down a bunch of words that are related to it. You could even, if you want, I guess, kind of draw a picture of it, or all those kinds of things there. But certainly, actually at this website, they do have a bunch of these already made. I don't think for this level of study it would maybe be as useful, but you can certainly see, it's called text project. You can certainly see examples of that, but it's basic, right? It's just, the vocabulary word. And if you want to put a bunch of related words there, or, words that you would consider sort of other words that maybe don't have that stimulus part in it, but could be seen as related, right? You could add different words, right? Or images, right? So I think most students are aware of Quizlet. So Quizlet is an online platform for really just for flashcards. But you could certainly put, like let's go back to audio or AUD. You could put AUD on the front of the card, and then on the back, you could put all of the vocabulary that maybe you need to remember related to AUD, right? Same with, any of your science words like hypo, let's say hypo is on the front, and then you'll have all of the words that are related to that hypo concept, maybe from your textbook, right? So certainly you can do that. And also with Quizlet, it's free, but you can also add visuals. So if I type in something, I can go the option of adding the photo in there right away. And usually it's just a matter of typing in the word, and then you can choose from a list, because they'll find different ones, different words that people have added, And then if I click on one of those words, it usually will, recognize it. And it might even give me an automatic definition, by the way. Quizlet is really, I recommend it first because it's free, but it's also, you can kind of use other people's, definitions, and you can just stick it into your flashcard. And of course, like I said, you can add visuals on the fly as well. So you can go to choose image, and then you have a whole bunch of different images that you can choose to use if you like any. This is way out there, but sticky tab wall, like, come on, let's have fun with the vocabulary, right? So get out your sticky tabs, start writing words all over, stick them up on your wall and go, how can I resort that? Part of really remembering words is relating it to things that are common. So remember, we were talking really about relating it to any words that have thermia or therm in it, right? But another way is just relating it to meaning, right? So you could have, I don't know, like audio, you could have video on there, you could have, maybe television on there, right? So you could start putting all kinds of words, and those maybe aren't good examples in terms of content that you might be studying, but the idea is there that put words that are interrelated, not necessarily the same parts, right? But interrelated in how you might think about them. So that's more about the themes that you're going to kind of, connect, right? And maybe for exams, right? So you've got to remember a certain thing about your exam. So you're going to put all of the words that are there, but it's in your face. Maybe put on your ceiling. So when you're sleeping, they're staring at you. There are studies, by the way, that if you study just before you go to sleep, your memory will hold those words better. Just note to self. And I already mentioned a little bit about word mapping. So, you have the word in there, and then you just add on the words that kind of relate, right? So it's not a word list then or definitions. It's one smattering, right, of really how your brain picks up stuff, right? It's interconnected. We want to see that. I personally am not a huge fan of these because I'm the kind of person, if I make a journal, I'm like, okay, where is my vocabulary journal? I have no idea where it is, but you could do it on your phone, I guess. You can write down certain words that you're like, oh my gosh, that's such a cool word. Or, oh my goodness, the professor has been saying that like 20 times in the lecture today. I really have to remember that. So you could, make it a little bit more, user-friendly and just have it on your phone, let's say, as you're in your lectures, and just know that there's a spot that you put these kinds of new words. And I already mentioned, actually, I didn't mention Merriam-Webster, but dictionary.com is an easy one. Thesaurus.com is a good one if you're getting into the concept mapping, let's say, so you can find different words that are related to that one word, right? Yeah, and if you're studying with a partner, obviously you're going to choose the words. And then why? Is it just because they're tough to remember, or do you think they're really important to remember? So, sometimes you have to decide what you need to do with your vocabulary. I tend to more focus on words that are new in terms of, memory. But again, connecting it to something that's already known is the ideal recipe, right? But look, when you study with somebody and you just, let's say, focus on vocabulary, you're going to talk about the content anyway, right? So it could just be, you got an exam coming up and you have to go, multiple choice based on definitions and certain terms. But if you study that with a study partner, let's say, you're talking about the vocabulary and you're using it. Okay. All right. I wanted to kind of keep this tight on time here today. So you can always contact me. We had been trying to do book clubs that we haven't done that, but unless there's people that come to me and are interested in those book clubs, please let me know. You probably know that there's all kinds of different resources out there in terms of the campus offerings. So we've got campus tutors, we've got workshops, that's at the Academic Learning Center, writing tutors, and then we obviously have our academic learning tutors that you can access as well. Okay. And those would be made, I think, as an appointment, right? And I'm going to stop there. And just contact me whenever you like. I'm at Valdine Bjornson at umanitoba.ca. Thank you very much for your time. Have a great day.